for a link to available jobs.
34 major gas companies and 11 oil companies owe millions to the North Dakota School Fund, and that's according to the state. But a group representing those companies says asking for this money right now would be, quote, borderline ludicrous. As Renee Cooper reports, the State Department of Trust Lands says this money has been owed for several years, while North Dakota schools hang in the balance.
It's a huge issue for both the state and the oil and gas companies. Royalties owed after the product is moved to market. It's a complicated subject involving deductions companies are making against royalty payments to the state. North Dakota Petroleum Council President Ron Ness says oil companies have to both market and transport their product to make it valuable. And those are the costs the companies are deducting.
If I take a barrel of oil or a bushel of wheat and I transport it and I get it to a better market like the Louisiana Gulf Coast or Japan, under the oil law, I can clearly deduct what I think are my transportation costs in order to get me a higher price for my oil.
But the state says in doing so, those companies aren't playing by the rules.
It's safe to say it's in the tens of millions.
North Dakota Land Commissioner Jody Smith says if royalties are not paid up by September 30th, the penalties go up. And she says many companies already owe penalties and interest dating back years. But the Petroleum Council says now isn't the time to address it.
It should not be even on the table for discussion.
About 10 years ago, the state stepped up its audits, discovering millions were owed. They've been pushing for payment ever since.
And that's what we found in our audits, and then just said you're not allowed to take deductions per our lease.
A letter was sent out to these companies in February, plus a few more that have now, quote, come into compliance with the state.
We got to let the courts decide.
The issue is at the center of a couple of pending North Dakota Supreme Court cases. One involves Newfield Exploration Company on the gas side and Continental Resources on the oil side. Smith says Newfield and Continental will be out of compliance until a decision comes down from the court. Ness advises oil and gas companies the state says owe money wait until the Newfield and Continental cases are settled to pay.
Really, while it's in court, those penalties and interest continue to accrue. So even though Newfield and Continental, it doesn't, for all those other operators out there who are waiting for that to be determined, their penalties and interest are accruing every month.
Smith says the department would be able to reimburse companies as quickly as a week if the court case ruled in favor of the companies. Reporting for KX News in Bismarck, Renee Cooper.
The Newfield case isn't set to be argued until late 2021, dragging this complex issue out for another year. If it's ruled in favor of the state, companies could owe retroactive royalty payments going back to when their wells first came online, and in a few cases spanning back to the 90s. Smith says a handful of the companies listed are currently working with the Department of Trust Lands on a payment plan. So since the majority of the funds collected by the Department of Trust Lands go to education in the state, are schools suffering the consequences? The money helps pay for both K through 12 and higher education. As of right now, Trust Lands funds $1,500 per student, and what the oil and gas companies are not contributing is being pulled from the general fund. So students aren't losing money, or schools aren't losing money, but due to the pandemic and loss of tax revenue, Smith says it's getting tougher and tougher to give more to schools as the cost of education continues to rise.
What's the consequence of it having to come from the general fund versus from companies?
Well, I think the biggest consequence is that, that general fund is built off of taxes. And we all know that, the taxes coming into the state are decreasing right now. And a lot of that does have to do with the ability of the state to continue to produce oil.
She says because of some of the bigger events like the State Fair and Hustfest are now canceled, the state is losing out on even more tax revenue.
Coming up in less than a half